This week on Quadriga, Refugee SOS. Is Europe responding? Since the beginning of this year, nearly 40,000 people have landed on Italy's shores, seeking refuge in the EU. Most of them come from Syria and sub-Saharan Africa. They have left everything behind, their countries and often their families. Desperation drives migrants to embark on perilous journeys. But Europe has been less than welcoming. In the Spanish exclave of Melilla, fortifications are in place to keep out supposedly illegal migrants hoping for a better life in the EU. What is Europe's answer? Your host this week, Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. Many refugees from war-torn countries are trying to reach Europe in hope of a better life. But they're encountering many difficulties along the way. So the question is, should and can Europe do more to help these individuals? That's what I want to talk about on today's show, together with three individuals, all who've been following the story very closely. Welcome to Christian Jakob, who's an editor and reporter for the German daily newspaper Die Taz, where he writes primarily about migration issues. Laura Lucchini is an Italian journalist writing for various newspapers such as the Italian L'Inchiesta, as well as the Argentinian newspaper La Nación. And Miriam Fassbender is a film director and cinematographer whose first feature documentary film titled Foreign follows the migration journey of two young men from Africa to Europe. Christian Jakob, back in October, more than 350 people died off the coast of Lampedusa, trying to come from Africa, mostly Eritrea, to Europe. And it sparked a huge debate. It sparked a huge political debate within Europe, if and whether Europe should and can do more. Has anything changed since then?
Well, we clearly have observed that Europe has not learned its most important lesson out of this catastrophe. Until now, there is no legal access to Europe for refugees. Refugees are forced to take dangerous, long journeys. That is the reason why still people are drowning in the Mediterranean Sea. What we also have observed is that the EU did set up a military mission together with the Italian government called Mare Nostrum, which led to a lessening number of accidents in the last months, where the numbers of refugees, especially from Syria, who have crossed the sea to Sicilia and Italy, has been growing.
So some things have changed for the better, but still far from the solution, if I understand you correctly?
Yes, well, the most important thing, the open access for refugees, a safe access, is still nothing heard of. But the situation in the Mediterranean Sea has been becoming better compared to the situation in October last year, when especially Italy and countries like Malta and Greece highly refused to take the responsibility for sea rescue.
So minor improvements have taken place and have been implemented. Miriam Fassbender, we've heard 40,000 migrants have trying to come to Europe only this year alone, in 2014. That's more than ever. How do you explain this huge influx?
I guess Europe is only more aware of people arriving here. I'm not so sure that the amount of people became really higher, but I guess we just, we are just more aware of the situation. I guess this is one advantage of, besides that we still don't have any immigration policy, but I guess the advantage is that the population is more aware of the situation and of the refugees arriving.
And Christian Jakob has already mentioned, the problem still remains with the fact that these people are risking their lives to come to Europe, fleeing their war-torn countries such as Eritrea, such as Syria, because there are no legal ways yet for them to enter the EU legally through procedures and as asylum seekers. Is that something that the European politicians are not aware of, or are they just procrastinating the problem?
No, I guess they are. The politicians are aware of the situation that sub-Saharan Africans, for example, they really don't have any possibilities to enter European embassies in their countries, and I guess they are just playing with the or they are waiting for how big the manifestation maybe against this situation will become and arise. And
well,
yeah, I guess the politicians, they are really counting on militarization and also of an exterritorialization of the borders. I mean, they are trying to get the refugee topic out of our sides, of the sides of the Europeans, so that we discuss it less. I don't know.
Well, the topic, Laura Lucchini, will remain with us, whether the politicians want it so or not, because just the numbers are staggering from Syria alone. Look at the numbers. I mean, Lebanon, a relatively small country, has already taken in 1 million refugees from Syria. Turkey has taken 800,000. Even a small country like Jordan, approximately 700,000 Syrian refugees. Here in Europe, the EU has taken in 90,000 Syrians. That's 1/10 of what Lebanon has taken in. It's only 4% of all Syrian refugees. Is this worthy? Is this worthy of a continent that prides itself on upholding human dignity and human rights?
No, it isn't. I think there's a huge problem. Also on immigration and refugees would be meaningful to distinguish. There are refugees escaping to find a better life, but there are also refugees escaping from a situation of war and emergency. So there should be a more focused strategy to deal with this, with the emergency of a war. Lebanon has taken 1/5 of the population of Lebanon in terms of refugees, so it's a lot, and Europe isn't doing that much as it should. Just consider that 14 countries in Europe didn't accept any. Not even one refugees from Syria. So all small effort is better than nothing. But I don't see a policy, an attitude which should be at a European one.
Christian Jakob, the European Union was clearly founded on the values of respect for human dignity and human rights. Yet if we look at the situation in this particular case with the Syrians, for instance, do these values only apply to Europeans?
Well, in terms of Germany, I can say that the number of Syrian refugees that have been let in is ashamingly low. Germany has taken 40,000 Syrian refugees since the war broke out in 2011, out of which 30,000 have come on their own terms in very different, difficult, dangerous paths and journeys. And the only group that has been taken in by the government proactively is around 5,500 by now. 4,500 more are already decided that they will be let in. Probably in the next week, the German interior ministers will decide for a new program of 10,000 places. Still, compared to Lebanon or the figures of Turkey or Jordan that you have mentioned, this is absolutely nothing. And well, one could say that in the face of the biggest humanitarian crisis of our time, the Syrian conflict, Europe is not fulfilling its moral and political duties at all. And
the German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier was recently on a trip to the Middle East where he pledged that Germany would take in more Syrian refugees. Is that a drop in a bucket here? Yeah, as I said, 5,000 were the first program, 5,000 more the second, out of which 500 have been arriving now in the last weeks. And probably 10,000 more will be decided in the next weeks, compared to around 10 million who were forced to leave their houses in Syria. That is nothing.
It really reflects the attitude of Central European countries toward asylum politics in Europe, that they are leaving the burden to external countries and they're not doing enough, just not talking about it. I don't think the public opinion in Germany would be against taking more refugees. Maybe you have better taste with it.
Yeah, concerning the public opinion, the results of the European election on May 25th, it was not that in these countries who are having a higher influx of immigrants coming, like Italy, necessarily the right-wing parties have won. The countries where we observed a gain of the votes for right populist and extreme right-wing parties were the countries in Central Europe where the number of immigrants arriving is comparatively low. So I mean, I wouldn't rely so much on the public opinion being totally against it, particularly in terms of Syria. People are very much aware that more efforts are really necessary.
But Miriam Fassbender, it still begs the question that internal politics, domestic politics, have to be taken into account. Public opinion has to be taken into account by politicians when we talk about this very sensitive issue of refugees. Now, there's been a rise in far-rightist parties, such as in France, Denmark, Austria, and Hungary. Is that something that politicians can ignore?
No, I don't think. I mean, I guess you no, they can't ignore it because probably it has to do something with people being afraid of what they have, or that their situation in their countries could change. But I guess the problem, or the trick of the politicians is really to try to keep the refugees in distance to us, and as soon as you get close to them or you get to know them and you realize that their situation or their life is not so different to ours. I mean, not in terms of wealthiness, but in terms of personal stories. Then you would probably have less people being afraid of immigrants.
But that strategy of trying to keep the refugees out of Europe and deter them from coming is clearly failing, isn't it? Yeah. All strategies, all tools that have been implemented are not keeping refugees from risking their lives and coming. So wouldn't it be better to deal with a more realistic approach here rather than wishful thinking?
Yeah, I guess it would make sense to give education visas or visas for work, also to sub-Saharan Africans or to South Americans, or and then also, I guess we really do have a duty in terms of Libya or Syria to take the people or to let them in. I mean, even people who are having families here, refugees, Syrian refugees having families in Germany, they have to take the boat or the illegal way because they don't get a visa for Germany.
Of course, the lack of a legal way to enter Europe is the main issue right now, because there's no corridor, no legal way also for Syrian refugees to get in, and that's the main issue. The problem is it's really difficult to solve because, of course, there has been some proposal about creating offices in those countries where the immigration produces to process the requests. But the problem is that human rights groups also denounce that could be tricky because of corruption, because of who guarantee a fair process in this case. And the problem again with the black dealers that could intervene in these offices. So there are things that can be done, but none of this is easy. And once again, putting offices outside of this country to process the request would be another time to put the problem out of Europe and not to see it again.
So as it stands, Christian Jakob, the EU is still focusing rather on toughening border controls. This is with the Frontex, the EU border agency that's been implemented since 2006, yet it only has an annual budget of merely 80 million, 85 million euros. Begs the question then once again, what about Frontex? What about these tools that are being implemented to supposedly find a solution to this problem? Where are the nuts and bolts here?
Well, in terms of Frontex, you have to take into account that Frontex itself is normally not the one who is setting up the border guards. Frontex is a coordinating office who is picking border guards from different European countries and sending them to the hotspots of the external borders. So their budget of 80 million, which is not so low, I would say, is not all that Europe is putting up to keep refugees from coming in. You have to add up all the sums that the member countries are spending for border security, which is a lot more. But I would like to go back to the question of the public opinion, and I would like to remember the 1990s. During the Yugoslavian war, Germany has taken a significant number of refugees, especially from Bosnia. As far as I remember, more than 300,000 people were brought here, and the necessity to save these people was clearly was clear to the public. The German public accepted this. I mean, I wouldn't say that there were no voices protesting against it, but in general, the political decision to let these people come in, spend a few years here in Germany until the war in their home country was over, was broadly accepted. And I don't see why a similar effort could not be made in terms of Syria today.
And let's get concrete here, because I think there's a broad agreement here on today's panel that the problem is that there are no legal ways for these refugees to apply as asylum seekers. What would then a legal solution look like, Miriam Fassbender?
I don't know, but I guess, yeah, I guess we could. I don't see the solution in opening the borders entirely to everyone, because but I guess Europe does have a demographic problem soon, so I don't see why politicians don't realize that it's important also to give visas, at least for getting an education in Germany or getting an education in Europe, or for working visas. I really don't. I really feel that the politicians don't recognize the people as enrichment, or that they don't see that they do have really strong sources in terms of their experience that they have made on their way towards Europe also. And yeah, I really feel that they're just ignoring that we can't. I mean, I can only talk about Africa, and it doesn't have any, or not in every country it has something to do with political refugees, but I really think a continent that is, where the wealth is based on colonization also, can behave like this. I mean, because, yeah.
Laura Lucchini, is that the problem, that we in Europe are perceiving refugees first and foremost as burden, as a financial burden, rather than perhaps, as Miriam Fassbender suggested, as someone who can contribute to our society and perhaps even tackle and solve the demographic problem that we're having in Europe?
Of course, there's a kind of hysteria about the problem that those people could cause once they are in the country. But for example, take also in Italy the public opinion. This huge wave of arrivals in the Italian coast didn't translate this time in a xenophobic vote in the European election, for example. That means that people vote in favor of a Partito Democratico, a party who defends a more soft line toward this problem. I think that these fears are not completely grounded. There has been other example in the past where opening corridors didn't translate straight away in a wave of people coming in. So these dynamics also find a balance by themselves sometimes. Of course, there have to be institutions and controls, but there has to be a way to enter legally in Europe, and the mindset have to change, because right now we're just waiting for the situation not be possible to solve anymore.
Christian Jakob, if we look at the situation realistically, there are 28 EU nations, and everybody's talking about everybody's appealing for the need to harmonize asylum system and asylum policy. But is that really realistic at the end of the day? 28 EU nations, all with their own individual police force and legal systems. how realistic is it that these nations can come together and formulate a common and comprehensive asylum policy?
Well, in terms of the legal framework, exactly this has already been done. In the common European asylum system that has been decided on in June 2013, the 27 EU member states did agree on a common asylum policy.
But that's on paper.
That's on paper, that is true, because de facto the burdens of the migration influx are extremely unequally distributed because of the Dublin regulation, which is highly in disfavor of the countries on the exterior borders, namely Greece, Malta, Spain, and Italy. And as long as this regulation is still valid, or is not be taken off,
so Dublin regulation needs to be reformed. Is that what you're saying?
I would say it needs to be abandoned. I would say there needs to be a new regulation set up which equally distributes the burden amongst all member states and not only on the ones on the exterior borders. And what I wanted to say is that as long as the Dublin regulation is still on, there is de facto no common European policy, because the exterior border countries are taking all the burdens, and the rest can say, oh, the people who are coming in, they have stepped into the Schengen area in Greece, in Italy, we can send them back.
Look at Greece. I mean, they said last year they spent 65 million euros to protect the sea, to patrol the sea, and they received from the European Union 14 million. Look at Italy, where Mare Nostrum is costing 9 million per month, and they're receiving just a small part from the European Union. Of course, there's a huge sense of frustration in these countries, because they are trying, on the other hand, to accomplish with the European imposition in terms of financial targets, but then they are let completely alone with this topic, and it is a problem of money, because Italy has two levels of problems. For example, there are no structure where to host these people. They are kept in schools and gymnasiums. And then the second problem is what to do with them after they arrived. Of course, Italy, I don't agree with this attitude, but they also did in the past, and they promised to let those immigrants go to other countries in the future if nobody deal with this situation.
And there's also the practice on top of that. We've been hearing about the so-called pushbacks, where refugees or security forces in Greece and Bulgaria, for instance, are expelling people before they can even process their asylum claims, which of course is illegal under EU law, which again begs the question, there are no repercussions for this practice. Why should anyone fear? Why should anyone, if there are no repercussions, no consequences of your actions, why should anyone, if you will, open up their borders, and if it's not freely, if the burden is not freely shared, as it isn't under the Dublin regulation, why should you be a team player?
Yeah, because it's about humans.
But do you see where the reluctance is being fueled then by countries like Italy, by Greece? They're saying, look, it can't be. We have 28 EU countries. 14 of them, as Laura Lucchini correctly said, are not even taking in one individual from Syria. And it's a pretty hard sell then to your own public, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, I guess the disbalance will grow between the member states, and also the tension will grow between or is already growing between states like the exterior European states and the Central European states. But yeah, I agree with Christian that we have to abandon the Dublin regulation. We also do have to stop doing contracts with countries like Tunisia or Morocco or Algeria, like this. I don't know, Rückabnahme, like this contracts with dictator states, or with states that don't accept the human rights. Regarding Germany, I guess we also have to ban the residency regulation. I mean, there's also lots we can already do in Germany only.
So, up until now, we've been talking about the refugees. Let's give them a platform, let's give them a forum where we can see and hear them as well. Because a lot of refugees are on the run, as we said, mainly from Syria and Eritrea, but also from other war-torn countries in Africa. Let's have a quick look of what they have to say.
We've been living in these caves for over 2 years. In the first year of the conflict, our homes were burned down. The regime came in and burned down our homes. We had no choice but to flee. Everything was destroyed. We have nothing left.
Here at least is safe and the neighbors are very welcoming. They're not letting us sleep hungry at night. They're feeding us.
If Africa had the resources and if it were God's will, we would never move to Europe. The only reason why we move to Europe is because we have to.
If God gives me the chance to be here and I make it to Europe, I'll do everything to become a good person for society.
Miriam, you've produced a very remarkable documentary titled Foreign, as we said, where you followed the migration journey of 2 young men from Africa to Europe. Give us a little bit of a sense of the lessons that you as a filmmaker also derived from this experience. What is the first and foremost concerns on the minds of these young individuals, of these 2 young men that you followed?
No, I guess the most important is to, for me, I really feel that poverty or lack of perspective has to be accepted as asylum reason in Europe. So that I was really following someone from Cameroon and from Mali, and I re-met them, and I just realized that not having any perspectives in your home country can be as hard as coming out of war-torn countries. And I really felt what I said before, that they really it was really an enrichment to exchange experiences with them and to get their attitude of life, and that's why I really I can support the European asylum politics, because I guess there are lots of reasons why people are leaving, and you really do have to have a fair case for everyone to check their asylum demand.
And following these 2 young men, what surprised you the most? Something that even you hadn't thought of before making this documentary? Something that perhaps changed your view and mind when it comes to the refugee situation?
Well, the first lesson was that I realized that flight doesn't have anything to do with really movement towards one place, but that it's more about waiting, or about waiting on the occasion to progress, and but still that you have to be aware all the time about deportations or about the police controls. And I think they are really strong. They do really have strong characters, because some of them are circulating from 2 to 10 years in front of Europe because of our asylum politics. They are forced to live in provisionary arrangement camps, or in the forests, or in the desert,
What happened to these 2 young men? Do you know?
Yeah, I know one returned to Mali, but I was. So I went there before the war, before the jihadists were establishing the Sharia there in the east of Mali, and one moved back, and he said that when the jihadists came to the region where he stayed, it was still better than when Europe was doing its intervention. And the other one is in Europe, and because he got an official invitation, and he's one francophone country, but I guess he feels he's not in good status because of the bureaucracy, because it's really difficult to arrive here, and then the waiting starts again because of bureaucratic reasons.
And obviously these 2 young men can't be here today, but on their behalf, if they were here today on today's show, what do you think? What would their message be out there to the public?
No, but I can talk for them.
Of course not.
They have to
but
be
you
invited.
But you followed them. You followed their story. You followed their plight. What do you think? What would their appeal be, deriving from their own personal experiences?
I guess regarding the one who is in Europe today, or even the opinion of both is we are still planning to do a tour with the movie in sub-Saharan Africa on places where lots of people are leaving, because they really share the opinion that that if they would have known how difficult it is or how many years they are, I won't say wasting, but how many efforts they are putting into the way, they would maybe have stayed in their countries, yeah, because probably they would have more wealth than being stuck in sub-European country with all these regulations of bureaucracy.
So, St. Jakob, do most of these refugees, don't they know what they're getting into? She says if they had known how difficult it happened, perhaps they would not have undertaken this exhausting and dangerous journey. You know, from your experience as somebody who covers this story and migration issues, do most refugees know what they're getting into?
Well, it is true that there is a huge lack of information. Many people do not know exactly how the journey is going to be, how dangerous, how risky it normally is. But on the other hand, there are success stories, and these success stories mostly find their way to the places where people are leaving off. So people do hear from people who finally arrive in Europe and do hear from how they set up their new lives, and that's highly attractive for them. And as long as, let's say, the perspective for a decent life is distributed so unequally among Europe and Africa, people are still going to want to try it on their own. But there's something else I would like to mention in terms of externalization, which has been mentioned here a few times before. Today, the European home ministers are having a conference in Luxembourg and probably are debating about a suggestion or a proposal of Greece and Italy, who are advocating that the setup of asylum camps run by the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission on Refugees in North Africa and other transit countries, to avoid that people have to cross the Mediterranean Sea to come to Europe to do their asylum application. So what they want is that they want to completely drive away the asylum processes that are now, of course, being made in Europe, in the countries that are supposed to give asylum, to the transit and the home countries, and this is something new. In 2004, Tony Blair and the former German Home Minister Otto Schily have already tried something like that, but it was rejected. And now, in the face of the Syrian crisis, Italy and Greece put this up on the agenda again, and the UNHCR said that they are not totally against it. So the risk that in the near future the entire European asylum system is partially put out to transit countries is
Yeah, but there are concerns on the side of human rights organization how to put in practice this, because it's a huge topic. It's not easy to control it again.
But I think that the essence here is, regardless of what bureaucratic hurdles or measurements you adopt and perhaps even implement at the end of the day, it will not deter people from coming. If you have nothing to lose, if you're in a war-torn country like Mali or Syria, your house is being bombed, you're going to flee. You're going to flee regardless. You know, we understand the necessity for solutions and mechanisms, but is that perhaps leaving out the human factor here?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it has to be considered a human factor, and it can't be ignored anymore since the last huge amount of deaths. The last figures that, according to Italian newspapers, there are 500,000 people on the coast of Libya ready to cross. So that would be totally a huge amount of people that Italy cannot deal. And right now starts the summer. Summer is the season in which people try to cross more. So it's a matter of months, weeks. It has to be faced for what it is, because right now what Europe did in the last years was always trying to forget the tragedy, look at the tragedy and then trying to forget. So some steps have been taken, I think, in the right direction, and this direction is to help these people and to find legal ways to get them in. This second aspect hasn't been solved yet. I think maybe could be a solution to organize offices to process the requests on the ground, but it is really a logistic problem to solve.
Now, Miriam, if we look at the situation from another point of view, you know, there are some voices within Europe who say, look, conflicts have always existed, wars have always taken place in the history of human mankind. As much as we regret this and as much as we condemn these, there's no way we as Europe can solve these problems on our own. There's no way we can take in all the refugees who are trying to come to us. What would you respond to someone like that?
I guess I'm always surprised, especially for Germans also, that people tend to forget that like 2 generations before my generation, people could flee to America or to the south of America, or even after the Second World War or during the Second World War to North Africa. So I don't know why people or why Europeans think they do have the right now to forbid suddenly immigration. I mean, you can see on the border towards Spain, especially in Melilla and Ceuta, in the exclaves, that people do have their foot already on European sand or on European beaches, and they still get deported. I mean, they reached Melilla and Ceuta, they are officially in Europe, and still their asylum request they can't ask for asylum, and this is also something against our humanitarian attitude.
But Christian Jakob, once again, humanitarian attitude aside, there is realpolitik. There are some difficult circumstances that Europe's been going through. What do you say to an Italian or Spanish or Greek who say, look, in my country there's 50% youth unemployment. We have riots on the streets. There's great concern about the future. Young people are lacking the perspectives. Is that a tough sell for him to say we need to take in more refugees?
Well, I wouldn't say that Greece or Italy will have to take in more refugees. Or Malta, they are already taking in a lot of refugees. I would say that these people are right saying that the rest of Europe should take in more, because there is a huge inequality in terms of internal distributions, as I have mentioned.
How do you overcome this inequality?
Well, there needs to be a reform of the European asylum architecture. And also the thing I've mentioned before, the Bosnia example, has showed that it is possible to take in a higher number of refugees that really would make a difference for example, in the Syria region. And as I said, I do not see the reason why this cannot be repeated in our times now.
And if you were an advisor, and I'm going to ask you the same thing, Laura, if you were an advisor, say, come on, devise a plan for us. What are the next steps that we need to take in order to ensure that we have a humane and dignified way of taking in these refugees in order to assume our responsibility on the European continent? What would you lay out?
This would be, I would say that four things would be necessary. One would be humanitarian visa to allow a legal entry for setting up an asylum application in a European country. The second would be a new distribution key among the EU member states that does not give all the burdens to the countries in the exterior borders. Then more resettlement places with for open contingents where people from highly conflicted regions like Syria, Darfur are taken to Europe to a safe haven, as Canada and the United States are already doing, without having to come individually on their own and without having to do this individual asylum procedure, which is extremely difficult. And the fourth point is what Miriam already has said, is the possibility to enter for terms of labor. Because many people who are coming are not refugees, they are seeking labor, and we also need people as a workforce to come in, and I do not see why we shouldn't open the European labor market also from immigrants from other countries, and not relying on who do not have to rely on facilitators to bring them in on dangerous and very expensive journeys.
Look at Syria, for example. I mean, 2 million people are displaced right now, and among them, I mean, Syria 2 to 3 years ago was a country with a huge middle class, and most of them are doctors, engineers, and Germany needs these people, for example. So there's no way for these people to get in for reason of work, and that's really shameful for Europe.
And Christian Jakob has already put forth a lot of suggestions. Realistically speaking, will they be implemented?
I don't think they would be implemented in the short term, but I think that there's been a shift in the attitude toward this problem, and I hope Italy will use the EU presidency to push up this direction and to push up on the agenda this topic.
So the necessity and the realization on the ground speaks volumes. I think it's been clear from the discussion today that Europe not only should but also can do more. We, of course, on DW will continue to follow the story. In the meantime, I want to thank my guests for sharing their insights into a very intricate and sometimes very passionate and emotional-led discussion. Thank you out there for tuning in. Looking forward to seeing you again next week for a new edition of Quadriga.